She was dragged from her bed in the dead of winter pregnant and cast out like she never existed. No one asked why, no one cared. But what happened next didn't just rewrite her fate, it redefined love trust and what it means to call a place home. Stay with us because this isn't just survival. It's redemption carved into the heart of the wild. Some stories don't unfold slowly. They don't come to us gently in the warmth of summer or ease us in with kind beginnings. Some stories arrive like a storm, swift and merciless, tearing the fabric of what we thought we knew. That was the kind of story Hannah found herself in. It began on a morning so cold it hurt to breathe. The wind swept through the valleys outside Zion like a blade cutting through layers of cloth and skin alike. Inside her small room at the edge of town, 17-year-old Hannah was asleep, unaware that life as she knew it was already over. She awoke not to birdsong, not to sunlight, but to rough hands pulling her from her bed. Her father's face, hard and distant, was the first thing she saw. He didn't say a word, just bound her wrists with coarse rope, muttering something bitter under his breath as if trying to exorcise her name from his memory. The warmth of her blankets vanished, replaced by the bite of dawn air and the sting of betrayal. She was pregnant. That was all it took. He didn't ask about the baby's father. He didn't want to know. In his eyes, she had ruined the family's name, sullied their good standing. To him, she was no longer a daughter, just a burden, a problem to dispose of. He dragged her outside and threw her into the back of a mule-drawn wagon. The wooden boards were slick with frost. She stumbled, fell, and he didn't help her up. He climbed aboard, flicked the reins, and said nothing as the town disappeared behind them. Not a soul came out to stop him. No one called her name. Hannah kept silent, holding her swollen belly teeth clenched against the cold. For miles they rode in silence, the wheels groaning under the weight of what couldn't be spoken. She wanted to scream, to ask where he was taking her, but fear kept her lips sealed. After hours of climbing into the mountains, they turned off the main road and followed a narrow trail that wove through thick pine and rising snowbanks. The world narrowed, closing in around them like a fist. The higher they went, the quieter it became until all Hannah could hear was the crunch of hooves and the pounding of her own heart. Finally, the wagon stopped in a small clearing surrounded by snow and shadow. There stood a man. Alone, tall and quiet, draped in a wolfskin coat. A shotgun slung across his back. His beard was thick and dark, and his eyes held the kind of stillness that made her chest tighten. Her father didn't greet him, didn't speak pleasantries, he just pointed. "She's yours now." Then he dropped a small canvas sack grain maybe and turned the mule around. No final words, no backward glance, just the steady rhythm of departure, like he was closing a chapter that had never really mattered. Hannah stood in the snow, her boots sinking with each breath. Her fingers were raw wrists aching from rope burns. Her breath turned to mist. The man didn't move toward her. He simply pointed toward a small cabin nestled beneath the trees and walked off without a word. She wanted to cry out, to scream at her father, to beg the stranger to say something, anything. But there was no use. She was alone now. The cabin door creaked when she opened it. Inside it was dim. One room, a single cot, a fireplace with a low-burning fire, a wooden table scratched and scarred. Animal pelts hung on one wall. It was not warm, but it was dry. It was not welcoming, but it was shelter. She moved slowly, closing the door behind her. Every step echoed in the wooden silence. She didn't sit on the cot. That felt like someone else's space. Instead, she curled up near the hearth, letting the fire lick at her toes. Her body ached, her belly heavy, her heart a silence too loud to bear. The man returned sometime after dusk. She didn't hear him enter, only saw the door open and his shadow fall across the floor. He didn't say her name, didn't offer food. He just placed a skinned rabbit on the table, lit a lantern, and began to cook. She watched him from her place by the fire, too tired to move, too numb to ask questions. When the meal was done, he ate half and left the rest in the pan. Without a word, he stepped back outside and disappeared into the night. She didn't touch the food. That first night, she lay curled on the floor, her body shivering under her coat, and listened to the wind whistle through the cracks in the cabin. Every sound was louder in the quiet, the snap of the fire, the creak of the logs, the slow ticking of her own thoughts. She whispered a name she hadn't spoken aloud before, the name she had chosen for her baby. Just once, just to make it real. The snow outside deepened. The moon rose behind a veil of clouds, and Hannah, no longer a daughter, not yet a mother, waited in the dark, unsure whether she had been abandoned or if this was in some strange way the beginning of something new. It didn't happen overnight. No great revelation, no sudden shift of the heart. Healing crept in like snowmelt through the cabin's cracks, slow, steady, and nearly invisible. At first, the silence between them was sharp, brittle, a wall of frost and fear. Luke was as quiet as stone, and Hannah carried too many ghosts to trust shadows, let alone a man she barely knew. Still, she stayed. Not because she felt safe, but because she had nowhere else to go. Luke would leave each morning before the sun stretched its arms across the canyon. He returned long after the sky dimmed to violet. Sometimes with firewood stacked on his shoulder. Sometimes a deer or a rabbit slung over his back. Always quiet. Always alone. He didn't speak to her, and she didn't speak to him. Their lives were parallel two souls in a small cabin orbiting without ever touching. Hannah tried to stay useful. She boiled snow for washing, swept the floor with a bundle of pine needles, and cooked what little she could remember from a childhood she now wore like an old coat, familiar, but no longer hers. But even her own hands felt foreign. Her body was a stranger. Her reflection when she dared catch it in the cracked window looked like a girl who'd aged decades in a week. Then the pain came. It started as a dull ache, then sharper sudden, stealing her breath in a gasp. She looked down and saw the blood dark and blooming across the front of her dress. Panic surged. She called out without thinking. The door slammed open and Luke was there, axe in hand, face pale, eyes wide. He dropped the weapon when he saw her. In 3 strides he crossed the room, scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and laid her gently on the cot. Not a word passed between them, but his actions spoke louder than comfort ever could. He stoked the fire to life, boiled water, brought every fur and blanket he could find. When his hand touched hers, she felt it tremble just once before he steadied it. The bleeding slowed. The pain dulled. She didn't lose the baby. Not yet. She whispered, "Thank you." Voice cracked like old wood. He didn't reply, but something inside the cabin had changed. Not the furniture, not the fire. Something deeper, like a wind shifting direction. The next morning, there were 2 bowls on the table. One for him, one for her. It was a small thing, maybe, but for Hannah it felt like a crack in the ice. She noticed more after that. Her boots left by the fire to dry had new soles, stitched rough but strong. A blanket had been draped over her while she slept thicker than the one she used. A wooden spoon hand-carved rested beside her plate. None of it was spoken of. Luke never mentioned the repairs, the gestures, but they were there. Quiet as snowfall, deliberate as kindness. She began humming again, not loud, not full songs, just fragments of old lullabies her mother used to sing. Melodies from a time before shame and silence. Luke never commented, but once she caught him pausing mid-task, his eyes lingering on her face as if trying to remember something he'd forgotten. Still, they didn't talk much. The words weren't there yet, but the silence no longer pressed against her ribs like a weight. It softened, became breathable. One evening, as she folded what few clothes she had, she found her shawl mended. The tear from weeks ago gone, patched with the same careful stitches. She didn't know what to make of him. Luke wasn't warm. He wasn't gentle. But he was steady, unshaken, like the mountains around them, not unfeeling, just buried. His silence had layers. Then came the night she heard him speak first. "You shouldn't stay near the door," he said quietly. It was the first thing he'd said that wasn't a grunt or a command. Why, she asked. "Wind finds the weak boards there. You'll catch cold." She nodded, unsure how to respond to the care hidden beneath the gruff tone. That night, she moved closer to the hearth and he didn't shift away. She began to watch his hands. The way he cleaned his tools, repaired traps, sharpened blades. They were capable hands, worn but precise. She realized that his silence wasn't absence. It was awareness. He noticed everything. Her limp after slipping on the ice, the way she favored her left side when sitting, the food she left untouched when nausea took over. And in return she noticed him, how he never let the fire die, how he always left water heating, how once she found a sprig of wild sage left on the windowsill, nothing said but the scent filling the cabin with memory. She still didn't trust him fully, but trust doesn't arrive like a parade. It arrives like dusk, slow, quiet, and inevitable. One morning she stepped outside to find a small bundle at the edge of the steps. Inside, a pair of mittens, too big, stitched unevenly, but warm. Her hands shook as she slipped them on. She didn't look for him, but she knew he saw. Later that week, while sorting kindling, she found an old brass bell near the mantel. Tarnished, its clapper gone. "Yours?" she asked. Luke nodded. "My mother's." She hung it by the door, said it kept bad spirits out. "Did it work?" He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "You're still here." For the first time in weeks, she laughed. Not a polite smile, not a breath through the nose. A real, sudden, from-the-belly laugh. And something in Luke's face shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but a softening. A thaw. That night she took the cot. He didn't protest. When tears came, slow and unexpected, he didn't try to stop them. He didn't move to comfort her. He simply sat nearby, silent and solid, letting her cry. In the morning, she found a wooden hairbrush on the table. The handle was smooth, hand-carved. Her name, H, etched faintly at the end. She didn't say thank you, didn't need to, because by then the silence between them had learned a new language. One made of mittens and mended shawls, of watching and staying, of two broken people who didn't rescue each other but who remained. And sometimes staying is the bravest thing of all. It came like a storm breaking open the sky. Not the kind that darkens the horizon with dread, but the kind that splits the heavens and reminds you what it means to be alive. Junia arrived in the dead of night when the wind howled through the trees like a warning, and snow clawed at the corners of the cabin. The pain had been building for hours, starting as a whisper in Hannah's back and growing into a roar that silenced everything else. She tried to hide it at first. She didn't want to wake Luke, didn't want to need him. But when the contraction stole her breath and doubled her over, the cry that escaped her lips was not something she could control. Luke was at her side before she could even gather her thoughts. His movements were precise, steady. He cleared the cot, fetched the towels, and boiled water like he'd been preparing for this moment his whole life. But Hannah knew better. He wasn't ready. No one ever is. Yet there was something in the way he moved, without panic, without hesitation, that made her feel like maybe she could survive it. The hours passed in a blur of pain and whispered prayers. Hannah screamed until her throat felt like fire, then fell silent when her voice gave out. She clung to Luke's hand like it was the last thing tethering her to this world. He didn't speak false comforts. He didn't tell her it would be over soon. He simply stayed. And then, just as the first light of dawn touched the snow-dusted peaks outside, a cry pierced the quiet. Not hers. A new voice. Fragile, furious, alive. Hannah collapsed back into the pillows, her body spent and soaked with sweat. Luke wrapped the baby in the flannel blanket she'd stitched weeks before, hands shaking now that the storm had passed. He said nothing as he placed the tiny bundle in her arms. She looked down at the life she had carried through exile and silence. 10 fingers, 10 toes. A wild crown of dark hair, eyes squeezed tight as if the world was too bright to bear. Junia, she whispered the name trembling out of her like a secret finely spoken. You are light in the wilderness. Something changed in the cabin that morning. Not suddenly, not loudly, but undeniably. A breath that hadn't been there before. A rhythm that hadn't existed. Hannah felt it as she cradled Junia to her chest, and she saw it in the way Luke looked at them, like maybe he understood what it meant to witness a miracle. He started speaking more after that. Not much, not loudly, but enough. Questions about warming milk. Wondering if the baby was cold, asking if her breathing sounded right. There were clumsy moments, like when he tried to braid Junia's hair months later with his thick fingers and ended up tangling it worse. But Hannah laughed. A real laugh. The kind that shakes your ribs and makes you forget for a moment that the world can be cruel. They fell into rhythm. A quiet kind of life. Luke built a chair for Hannah beside the fire so she could rock Junia during the night. He adjusted the windows so the breeze wouldn't chill the baby. In spring, they planted a garden behind the cabin, breaking the frost-bitten soil with hope instead of fear. Junia grew fast, her laughter like bells ringing through the valley. Luke carved her toys from leftover wood, a fox, a bird, a deer with crooked legs. Junia loved them all. She'd squeal and giggle as he wiggled them across the table, her tiny hands clapping in delight. Hannah, one evening, pulled out the old book she'd found in the trunk beneath the cot. Its spine was cracked, its pages yellowed, but the words still held magic. She read aloud, her voice soft and unsure. When she stumbled on a long word, Luke leaned closer. "What's that one?" he asked. "You don't read," she said. "Not judgmental, just curious." "Not." "Well," he replied. So she showed him. Letter by letter, syllable by syllable. Junia would sit on Luke's lap, babbling nonsense as they practiced. That became their ritual. Every evening after the fire was fed and the chores were done, Hannah would open the book and read. Some nights, Luke would try to read too, his voice rough but careful. It wasn't just learning, it was connection. A tether forming between them built not from grand gestures but from shared space and gentle effort. One clear afternoon they flew a kite. Luke had built it from newspaper and twine, patched with cloth scraps and hope. The wind tugged it skyward, higher than they'd imagined. Junia danced in the grass below, arms stretched toward the sky, her laugh echoing through the trees. And in that moment, watching their daughter Hannah realized something astonishing. The cabin no longer felt like a cage. It wasn't exile. It wasn't punishment. It was sanctuary. A place where she had not only survived, but begun again. There were hard days, of course. Junia teethed and screamed through the nights. Luke grew frustrated when the rabbit traps came up empty. The garden failed once in late frost, but those days didn't define them. They were just threads in the larger weave. Hannah began journaling in the margins of the book. Just thoughts. Quiet victories. The first time Junia said "Mama." The day Luke left a sprig of wildflowers by her pillow without a word. The morning she woke to find him gently holding Junia, both of them asleep, her daughter's fingers wrapped tight around his thumb. She didn't write poetry. She didn't have the words for that. But she had memories, moments that built upon one another like stones in a foundation. The life they were building wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished or planned, but it was theirs. And in that there was something more powerful than perfection. There was love. Real love. The kind that didn't demand anything. That didn't rescue. That didn't fix. It simply stayed. And staying, as she'd come to learn, was its own kind of miracle. The wind had softened by late spring, carrying with it not just the scent of pine and warming soil, but something harder to name. A kind of stillness that felt like holding your breath. Hannah was outside brushing Junia's hair when she saw him. A figure at the tree line, thin, uncertain. A boy wearing a man's height, but none of its certainty. She stood up, slowly, pressing Junia closer. "I'm looking for Hannah." The stranger called out, and it was the way he said her name that did it, like it was something lost he'd finally found. Luke stepped onto the porch without a word, his presence quiet but immovable. Hannah didn't answer. Not yet. The stranger pulled off his cap, revealing eyes too familiar to ignore. "It's me, Ben." Hannah felt the world lurch sideways. Memories flooded back, not of townsfolk gossip or her father's fury, but of small things. A boy with a scraped knee, she used to read stories to a brother who once hid with her under the porch during a thunderstorm. Her voice caught in her throat. She hadn't heard his name in years, hadn't expected to hear it again at all. Ben stepped forward. "Mama's sick. Real sick. She asked for you." There was silence. Luke didn't speak. Junia stirred in her arms. She said, "She told me the truth, about what he did, about how she didn't stop him." Ben's voice cracked. "She said to find you, that she's sorry. That word, sorry." It landed like a stone in a pond, sending ripples through everything Hannah had built since the day she'd been cast out. She didn't know what to say, what to feel. She didn't know if she wanted to go back to a place that had stolen so much from her. Luke didn't ask questions. He packed her a satchel, tucked dried food and flannel into it, then gently laid his old coat over her shoulders. "You don't owe anyone anything," he said. "But if you need to go, we'll be here when you return." And so she went. The path down the mountain was both familiar and foreign. Junia rode snug against her chest, wrapped in a sling Hannah had sewn herself. The journey was quiet. Ben didn't talk much, and she didn't push. He looked older than she remembered, but smaller somehow, like someone who'd carried a burden too big for his shoulders. When they reached town, it was as if time had slowed and sharpened. The same buildings, the same crooked fence posts. But now she saw them differently. The bakery that once smelled like cinnamon now seemed cold. The church bell was silent. And people looked, some with shame, some with fear, some with the kind of curiosity that asked questions without needing answers. They reached the house. She hadn't set foot there in years. Not since that frozen morning when she was dragged from her bed and tossed like garbage. Her hand trembled on the doorframe. Inside, the air was stale, heavy. Her mother lay in the same bed that had once been off limits to her children. Clara, her mother, rasped, using her given name for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I'm here." Her mother's eyes filled. "I should have stopped him. You should have." Hannah said, not unkindly, not bitter, just honest. The truth didn't sting as much as she thought it would. It felt more like breathing after holding it too long. "I was afraid," her mother whispered, "afraid he'd do to me what he did to you. But I failed you. and I know it." There were no more words. Just the sound of Junia's soft breathing, the creak of the floorboards, as Ben moved through the house. Hannah stayed for 3 days. Not because it was easy, but because she needed to know she could. She watched her mother pass gently one hand on her granddaughter's back. She told the sheriff everything about the preacher's son, about her father's violence. The law moved slowly, but it moved. For the first time, someone listened. She walked through town with her head high. Not because she'd forgotten the pain, but because she carried it differently now. Her story was no longer one of shame. It was strength, survival, and the quiet refusal to disappear. Before she left, she stood at the threshold of her childhood home. Not to mourn it, not to reclaim it, but to look at it clearly one last time. The kitchen, where her mother baked bread, the wall where her father's shadow once loomed, the hallway where she used to tiptoe past closed doors. She closed that door behind her, and didn't look back. Ben helped her saddle the mule for the trip back. He didn't ask to come with her, but she asked him. "You can stay with us a while," she said. "Help around the place. Learn what Luke knows. Junia would like that." He didn't cry, but something in his shoulders eased. They rode in silence, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind that settles after a storm. When the cabin finally came into view, smoke curling from the chimney wood stacked high against the wall, Hannah's heart swelled. Luke stood by the porch, arms crossed, watching. She stepped down and walked toward him, Junia nestled against her. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would," she replied. And in that moment, something old let go. Something new took root. It wasn't the kind of proposal one read about in books. There were no flowers, no dramatic declarations, no kneeling under the stars. Just a quiet evening, a whisper between dishes and firewood as Hannah leaned against the doorframe and said, almost as if asking about the weather, "I think I'd like to marry you." Luke didn't look up at first. He was carving a piece of cedar for Junia, small enough for her hands. But his hands stilled, and when he did raise his eyes, there was something in them she hadn't seen before. Not surprise, not hesitation. Something closer to recognition. "If it's what you want," he said. "I think it is," she replied. "But not a big thing, not like in town, just us, here, where it started." And that was all. No fanfare, no ring just yet. But something shifted again in the air around the cabin. A promise had been spoken, one not built on expectation but understanding. Ben, who had stayed longer than expected and never seemed in a hurry to leave, offered to help. He gathered wildflowers, hung garlands along the beams, and swept the clearing beneath the spruce where Hannah had first stood months ago, uncertain and afraid. Now she stood there with bare feet and a linen dress the color of river stones, her hair braided with sage and memory. The old marshal from down the ridge who had once fought in a war, and now kept to himself unless someone needed mending, came too. He brought elderberry wine and a cracked book of verses. It was he who read the lines, voice steady but soft with age. "You may speak your promises now," he said. Luke cleared his throat. He didn't speak much in general and never about feelings, but his voice didn't shake. "I promise not because I have to. Not because anyone says I should, but because you are the first place I've ever wanted to stay. I'll build what you need, I'll stand when you can't, and when you're too tired to fight, I'll hold the line until you can." Hannah's words came slowly thick with emotion. "I don't have pretty words," she said, "but I know this. I came here broken. And instead of trying to fix me, you waited, you gave me space. And now I choose you. Not because I need saving, but because I want to walk forward with someone who understands what it means to stay." They didn't kiss with applause or cheers. There was no audience, only the trees and the birds, and Junia clapping her little hands, She wore a crown made from twigs and grass, and the cabin that once stood like a stranger now felt like a witness. Afterward, they shared bread and wine. Ben had tried baking a sweet cake. It was a little lopsided and half-burnt, but no one cared. They danced slowly under the golden light of sunset, Junia twirling in the grass. The air smelled of pine and smoke, and the mountain which had once felt like a wall now felt like a home. Days passed gently. Luke built a swing for the porch. Hannah showed Ben how to grow carrots. Junia learned new words, soft ones, strong ones. They added a small coop for chickens, and the evenings were filled with laughter, with quiet reading, with the sound of boots returning before dark. Hannah wrote in the margins of their old book the one with the broken spine. Notes about days that felt full. The day Junia helped plant the herb garden. The day Luke surprised her with a rocking chair carved by hand. The morning she woke and realized that her heart no longer waited for something to go wrong. One stormy evening, as thunder rolled down the canyon, Hannah watched Junia sleep and turned to Luke beside the fire. "Do you think it's strange," she asked, "that the worst day of my life brought me here?" He didn't answer right away. He looked into the flames, his face lit with the gold of it. "I think," he said slowly, "that pain leaves space for something better to grow in its place." She leaned her head against his shoulder. Her ring, carved from walnut wood, caught the light. It wasn't fancy, but it was shaped by his hands from the tree where she'd once stood lost. It was enough. That night, they didn't speak much more. They didn't need to. Because the walls of the cabin held their stories, because the wind outside no longer howled with fear, but hummed like an old song, because the fire didn't just warm their bodies, it reminded them of how far they'd come. They hadn't built a perfect life, but they'd built an honest one of second chances and quiet victories, one of waiting and returning, one where love wasn't a loud thing, but a steady one. Not a rescue, but a partnership, and that Hannah realized was what home truly meant. Not a place without pain, but a place where you could let it go. Not a story without scars, but one where they no longer defined you. It was a vow, spoken not once, but every day. In shared coffee, in planted seeds, in repaired fences, in held hands. It was the sound of boots on the porch, the weight of a baby asleep in your lap, the quiet promise that you would stay, that you were seen, and that no matter how the storms might come, you would face them together. A quiet vow, but one that meant everything. In the stillness of Zion's mountains, where silence is not emptiness but peace, Hannah's story came full circle. A story born in exile and pain, shaped by silence and resilience, and finally fulfilled in quiet joy. It was never about grand victories or public redemption. It was about choosing to stay again and again through storms, shadows, and the unknown. Her journey began with betrayal, a father who turned his back, a town that whispered and judged. She was cast out not just from a home, but from the identity she once knew. In that snow-covered wilderness, stripped of belonging, Hannah was not rescued. She was not coddled. She was left to survive. And yet, survival became the foundation for something stronger than any comfort she had ever known. The cabin, a structure of rough logs and colder silence, held no promises, but it offered shelter. And in that shelter she met Luke, not a man of words or gestures, but a man of presence. Their connection wasn't instant. It wasn't romantic in the way stories usually tell. But over time, through unspoken kindness, shared meals, and mutual respect, something sacred formed between them. Something unbreakable. Then came Junia, her daughter, her light. A child born not out of tragedy but in defiance of it. Junia symbolized everything Hannah had been denied and everything she reclaimed. She wasn't a reminder of shame, but a declaration of strength. Through the pain of labor, the sleepless nights, and the joy of every milestone, Hannah became the kind of mother her own had been too afraid to be. Brave, present, unyielding. In Junia's laughter she found healing. In Luke's silence she found safety. In her brother Ben's return she found closure not from vengeance, but from truth. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it gave her power over it, to return to the place where she was wronged, to face those who had forgotten her, and to leave not as a victim, but as a survivor. The vow she made with Luke was simple. No altar, no applause, just a promise to stand beside each other to hold steady when life shook the ground beneath their feet. They didn't build a perfect life, but they built an honest one. Days of hard work, of laughter around the table, of small moments that strung together like pearls on a thread. And that thread, that quiet, strong thread, is what wove them into a family. The lesson Hannah's story leaves us is profound, and one we too often overlook in our pursuit of perfection, comfort, or recognition. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is staying. Staying through discomfort, staying through uncertainty, staying present in the moments that don't come with answers or applause. You don't need to be saved to find peace. You need space to grow, space to grieve, space to rebuild, just as Hannah did. Her story is not just for those who've been cast out. It's for anyone who has felt unseen, anyone who has questioned their worth, anyone who has stood at the edge of a life that didn't go as planned and wondered if something better could be built from its remains. Because the answer is yes. Yes, love can come after silence. Yes, peace can be found after pain. Yes, home is not just a place, it's a promise. A promise that no matter how far you've wandered or how much you've lost, you can still begin again. That the darkest winters may yet birth the brightest dawns. So as you close the chapter on this story, hold that truth close. You are not your past, you are not your shame. You are not what was taken from you. You are the love you give. You are the strength you build. You are the home you choose to create. And like Hannah, you too can stand on a porch, hold someone's hand, and say, I choose you. I choose this. I choose to stay. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own resilience, your own journey through storms, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling stories like Hannah's. Stories of grace healing and the quiet victories that define us. We're here to remind you every story matters, especially yours. So saddle up, dear friend. The next legend is waiting.